Welcome back to Amateur Hour. With the tailstock done, we're moving on to the motor. So we've got a leather belt drive, and the tensioner that they built is actually pretty cool. Whoever rigged it, they weren't dumb. It's actually got a little catch in there to keep it from slamming into the drum, and when it's out of tension it misses the speed select in most positions. So, you know, it's pretty cool. So hopefully we'll be able to get this belt off in one piece, pulling this pin. And then there's just 4 bolts holding the motor on, so we'll get the lift over here, get it sported, and get it onto the workbench. Easy peasy Japanesey. Well, there's a hornet's nest. Luckily a long abandoned hornet's nest. That would have been very unfun. Aha! Now we're getting somewhere. Not sure where, but we're getting somewhere. Alright guys, sorry for the time skips on this one, but turns out taking this thing apart is a two-man job, and it was too hard to coordinate getting this apart with my dad and also running the camera. So I'm just going to have to go back and explain all this to you. So here's our stator for the motor right here. And back here is the gearbox inside this housing right here. Then we have the coils right here, okay? And then this cap went on top of all that, okay? So right here, these 4 bolt holes held a cap that a bearing, this bearing right here, went into. So the bearing seated in here, and then those 4 bolts went through this housing and into this cap right here that's behind the bearing. And that's how it kept all the grease in. In addition to these 4 bolt holes that hold in the bearing cap, You also have these 4. And these are these really long ones that you saw me take out earlier. Okay. And they go through here, through this section of the case that goes around the coil. And then they seat right here. And so that's what holds the whole motor assembly onto this. So everything from this line right here back over here, that's all motor. Okay, in case that wasn't obvious. Up here, you have the gearbox. So on this Lima, this is a gearbox that runs through here into a series of gears that I'll show you later. And then all the power, the work comes out the front, okay? So how do we get this apart? Well, we unbolted those 4 large bolts and the ones on the cap, and you have to undo all of them because you can't pull this cap, this bearing cap, through the tail cap, okay? And this is a very tight fit, as most bearings are. I'm going to explain this like I'm 5. And we just had to go with progressively larger and larger pry bars working both sides, and this is why this is a 2-man job, until the cap came off, okay? If you end up taking apart this specific motor, or one that is physically like it, it is easier to lay it on its side because of this foot here. The way the feet sit, the whole thing tries to settle, and it gets really hard to pry this off, okay? So if you can lay it on its side, that'll help. If you think you have a leak, then you need to go ahead and drain the oil out of this, because if you think there's going to be oil coming in here, you do not want to get it into the stator or the coils. It's bad, 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 bad. Don't want that, okay? So you may just consider draining the oil like we did, especially if you intend to replace it. So before you start cleaning this, cover this bearing with, I've just got a plastic bag, and then I've zip tied the back of it, because you do not want to get gook in this bearing. It will take forever to clean out. You don't want that, okay? So get this covered, and then that frees you up to, you can use air. I'm using brushes and air basically, and some scrub pads like these to clean up all the fans and everything else that I can. I'm going to blow this out, okay? In this case as well, one thing I want to point out, this motor's pretty old, and so all the insulation on this is kind of dry rotted. So if you're going to blow these out with air, don't get right up on them. You could blow the insulation right off the wire, and that's a bad day. Okay, so now we get to the really fun part. When we got these parts off, we started cleaning up the slow oil leaks that we had, and found the paint has come off in a lot of these places, and that's somewhat unavoidable. But the other thing that we found is that the seals and gasket here, they're crumbling. So we're pretty much stuck. We're going to have to take this off and put new gaskets on. So if yours is anything like ours, you're going to have some parts on the output shaft. In our specific case, we had the roller that the belt sits on, and we had this little hand crank so that you could manually turn the motor's output. So getting these parts off also turned into a 2-man job because we had to use a puller, okay? Now, even with loosening everything, we still had to put a puller on it, and it took 2 guys, one of us to hold the claws in place and the other one to operate the puller, okay? And you can see we needed a rather large one, especially for this piece. So apart from requiring a puller due to how tight a fit this one was fairly easy. There were 2 set screws. We loosened those, put the puller on it, and pulled it off. Behind that was the belt seat on the output shaft. I had to dig out these 2 little pockets here. They were filled with gook. I just used some dental tools, and basically there were 2 set screws. And the way that we were able to tell where those were was because we had a keyway right there. So we had to loosen the set screws, put the puller on it, and pull that out. All right, so in here you can see that we have the gear assembly inside the gearbox. The gears look really good. I'm not sure that this machine was used very much after its retrofit. All the gears look nice and clean. Everything runs real smoothly. So we're not going to do much of anything inside of the gearbox. We're just going to get the seals replaced, blow out these sections, maybe hit them with some wire brush, and then put the whole thing back together again. Okay, so now that you're all cut up, we're going to do a little bit of exploratory surgery. I don't know what this gasket is going to look like. I'm hoping that it's identical to the one on the other side, but I'm also not completely sure. I have to replace the one on the other side. But regardless of that, we're going to take this apart and have a look and see what we got. Okay, so as I pry on this cover, the entire assembly is coming out, and I can see the seal, and it is very, very brittle. I'm just using this little flat tip screwdriver to kind of go around and get the seal off of the cap. So let me see if I can get the cap off without having to. No, it's going to kind of come out in one, isn't it? Oof. All right. Too much fun. Let's have a peekaboo in here and see what's going on. Okay, so here's a tip when you're doing this yourself. Do not pull this whole shaft out, because there are gears that are seated inside of a, I don't know what you'd call that. Basically, they're supported, this axle is supported inside the gearbox, and once you pull that out, it comes out of that seat. So now I'm going to have to find a way to weasel that thing back in there pretty blindly. So this cover does self-spin. Let me see if I can get it off. It'll spin free of the rest of this thing. Yeah. Okay, so given the choice, when you're replacing this gasket here, just take that off. Don't take the rest of this off. Now I got to figure out how to weasel jam that thing back in there. Okay, so another note, whatever you do, even if you lose some of this, do not pull this all the way out, or all the gears will fall off of this shaft. I haven't done that, luckily, yet. There we go. Whew. That was a close one. Okay, so minor crisis averted. We have the gasket, which we're going to try to carefully get off in as close to one piece as possible. Okay. And there we go. Okay, so this broken edge right here is the one that let us know that there was a problem. It came off in the process of just trying to clean up where the grease had eaten the paint off right here. So now we just need to find either a matching gasket or gasket material and put it on and recap it. And we'll have to do the same on the other side, which is probably going to be kind of a pain. But we'll inspect that gasket before we do anything with it, because getting the stator off, I don't know about that. We'll have to see. Alright, so I've got my freed gasket, and I've measured it as a 3.5 inch internal and a 5-inch external. I then ran over to the O'Reilly Auto Parts, and I've picked up some rubber fiber sheet, which is, you can see from the labels, good for oil, water, or gasoline. In this case, oil. And now I've got it on the workbench, and I've got it weighed down to try to get it to lay a little flatter. Basically from here, we'll just take a compass, set it up for the radius, and spin it to score it, and then change the radius to the second size, and then just spin that again. And from there, we'll just cut out the shape with an X-Acto knife. I'll probably bring in the cover and lay that on there centered, and use that to mark the four mount holes that we have to cut out as well. Alright, so that's the first one. I showed you poking these holes out here using a leather punch. These holes are actually too small, but I wanted to demonstrate that if you had the right sized one, it's way easier to use one. I have a larger leather punch somewhere around here in the shop that I'll have to find, but once I find that, I'll use it the same way that I used the smaller one. So we got to make one more of these for the other side, more likely than not. But I also have to determine whether or not I can get the stator off, because if I can't get the stator off without causing problems, then an oil leak's better than a not working motor, right? So that's going to take some investigation. We can also use the rest of this material to seal up the square section on the bottom when we put that panel back on and refill it with oil. Alright, so next episode we're going to put the new gasket in on this output side. We're going to check the input side over here and see if we need to put a new one in. If necessary, then we'll pull all the stuff off of that shaft and then put the new one in. Here's hoping we don't have to, but we're probably going to have to. We'll also cut out the gasket to seal the bottom panel here to prevent all the oil from leaking out from there as well. Between this episode and next, there's going to be some boring cleaning stuff. I'll blow out the coil and just kind of wipe all the gook off as best I can. But I'm not going to do anything mechanical until the next episode. So next time you see it, pieces should be a little cleaner, and we'll be starting to either do the last of the disassembly to fix everything up, or we'll be putting the thing back together next time.
Why do I have to love burritos so much? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on you. Hello, darkness, my old friend.